A spark in the docks. Frairen moved through the market like a shadow that remembers light. He kept his hands where folk could see them, and his eyes on the small things that mattered to people who had little left. He traded favors for food and stories, for parts, and he had a laugh that could make a tired child stand straight again. Miss Rimiki walked with a careful softness that hid the way her hands rewired broken things. She taught children to read star maps, and she taught sailors to trust their guts. Both of them had scars that sang when the wind turned, and both of them believed that small kindnesses could bend the hard laws of this rough sector. The docks smelled of oil and wet metal, and the city itself had grown like a barnacle on an old world. Towers patched with plates and cloth, lights held up with prayer and grit. People traded news like coins, and everyone watched for the salvage calls that sometimes came across the nets and promised engines that still dreamed of speed. Frairen and Rimiki met at an auction where a crooked broker sold a spool of memory tape, and they argued over its worth until the broker laughed and tossed it into the crowd. It landed at their feet like a small prophecy. The tape carried a short burst of code and an image. The image showed a ring of machinery like a sleeping crown, and the code carried a fragment of a beacon, a salvage signature so old it belonged in ghost stories. When Frairen fed the fragment to an old deck, it sang like a distant bell, and a dozen eyes around the market narrowed with hunger and hope and fear. Someone with a scar like a ledger reached for the fragment and missed, because Rimiki moved faster, and the two of them locked hands for a second and both felt the world tilt. They assembled a small crew of strangers who had nothing left to lose, a humorless mechanic with a laugh like metal on metal, a young pilot who never had a home, a medic who kept a secret smile for plants. And together they chartered a rusted cutter that smelled of coffee and old song. The crew named the cutter Dawn because dawn was a habit and because names keep ships honest. They followed the beacon past old minefields, and beyond the routes the trade guilds kept mapped. The stars looked older out there, and the silence tasted like old promises. When they found the derelict, it floated wrapped in starlight and shadow. The hull held scars from something that had not been human at its making, and the markings were older than the maps they all carried. The cutter's hull hummed when they came close, and Frairen felt that hum in his teeth. Rimiki shut off the external cams, and they crossed into the derelict by rope and by will. The corridors were wide like the arms of some long sleeping machine, and the lights inside woke with a pattern that slid like memory into Rimiki's mind, and it made her throat tighten with a thing like recognition. Inside the heart of the wreck, the air tasted of copper and rain on an empty day. Panels showed symbols that looked like childhood games and like math at the same time. The crew found a chamber where a single module rested like a heart wrapped in dust. When they brushed the casing, it pulsed, and a voice like old data filled the room with a pattern that meant drawing and building and remaking. The module called itself a forge in the slant language of lost engineers, and for a moment everyone stood and listened, as if the machine had begun to sing a lullaby for the future. The module's wake sent a small ping across the net, and that ping was a candle in a forest. 10 light years away, a warlord smiled as he read the echo, and another ship logged coordinates without pride, and an alien watcher paused her route and tuned her instruments because curiosity had teeth. The cutter crew did not know those watchers, yet they knew the moment had teeth too. It would bite, and it would heal depending on what they chose. Frairen felt his hands go cold, and Rimiki reached for the module like a mother reaching for a newborn, and for a second their hands met, and the world made a small, quiet decision. They tried to tow a fragment toward the dawn, but the derelict woke more than they planned. Lights brightened in patterns that were nearly songs, and a beacon began to bloom like a flower that had waited centuries for rain. Voices in the dark hissed through comm lines with the practiced calm of men who sell danger for coin, and a sleek shape folded out of the black and drifted between the derelict and the cutter. Its hull carried marks that were not human, and its movement was a question. A figure stepped from that sleek ship and walked into the float of lights like a memory come to the docks. The stranger spoke in a voice stitched from kindness and calculation, and he offered help that smelled of both hope and bartered nights. Frairen looked at Rimiki and saw the same sharp hunger and the same bright fear that lives in people who must decide if they will change the future for bread or for a promise. Rimiki pressed a hand to the casing of the forge and felt a warmth. That was not heat, and she whispered that the machine could change living blood and steel alike, and that the world would shift if they let it. The cutter crew sealed the entry with rope and with oath, and as they prepared to carry the fragment back, To the dawn, the market nets lit up with the signal, and 10 people who had no voice in the world began to watch and to hope and to fear at once. Frairen and Rimiki looked at each other, and they knew the choice before them would be heavy and wild, and it would not be theirs alone. They took the fragment, and the derelict hummed like an old animal, and the cutter's engines sighed awake, and they set a course home with the beacon echoing behind them like a question waiting for an answer. Frairen moved through the market that stretched across the floating docks like a living maze made of steel wood and sweat, and the sound of hammers on hulls echoed through the air while the smell of salt and oil clung to every breath and every dream. Because this was the edge of a world that had forgotten what peace looked like, yet still pretended it could be rebuilt, piece by piece, and trade by trade, and in the middle of that chaos, Frairen walked with the easy confidence of a man who had lived among thieves and saints, and learned that both kinds of people were made of the same hunger, just dressed differently in hope or greed. He was tall and lean, with a jacket patched from 10 different uniforms and eyes that never stopped scanning the crowd, because in this place, you could find salvation or ruin in the space of a single heartbeat, and he had no intention of dying poor or unnoticed because he carried a secret too old for comfort and too heavy for silence. Miss Rimiki was on the other side of the dock when she first noticed Frairen. Not because he stood out, but because he didn't. He moved like someone who had learned to make himself small in big places. Yet the people around him seemed to breathe easier when he passed, and she recognized that quiet gravity, because she had it too. Though hers came from different ghosts, she wore her hair tied back with a copper wire, and her hands were always smudged with grease and light. She had built things that should not have flown and fixed machines that had been declared dead twice over. She believed that every broken thing was only waiting for the right kind of attention, and she spent her days proving that belief one gear and one spark at a time. She was in the market for star map fragments that day, chasing rumors of a derelict orbiting in a dead zone beyond the mapped sectors, when fate decided to play its hand. The auction was held under a cracked dome where the air shimmered with heat, and the crowd pressed close to the platform where a broker with gold teeth and empty morals was selling whatever the scavengers had dragged in that week. There were boxes of burnt circuits, crates of spoiled rations, a stack of broken rifles, and one small coil of memory tape wrapped in silver foil. The broker called it worthless data, but his smile said otherwise, and Rimiki's gut told her he didn't even know what he was holding when the bidding started. Frairen raised a hand at the same time Rimiki did, and their eyes met across the crowd, and something like recognition flared between them. Neither of them backed down, and the broker laughed, like a god enjoying the mischief of his own creation, then tossed the tape into the air and let it fall where it may. It bounced once, twice, and rolled right between their boots, like it had chosen its owners. Frairen crouched first, and Rimiki's hand landed on top of his, and for a heartbeat they both froze, feeling that strange electric pulse of two people who had been waiting for something without knowing what it was. They stood together with the tape between them, and without a word they walked out of the auction hall because the noise behind them didn't matter anymore. Back on the docks, Rimiki loaded the tape into a hand terminal old enough to belong in a museum, and the screen flickered, then bloomed with an image of a massive, ring-shaped structure floating above a gas giant, its surface covered in lights that pulsed in rhythmic patterns like a sleeping heart. The data fragment that followed was short, a string of coordinates and a code phrase that no one had used for over 1,000 years, a salvage beacon from the time before the Great Diaspora, and Frairen knew then that whatever this was, it was older than Empire and richer than any pirate could dream. They gathered a crew, because no one in their right mind went that far alone, and those who joined were a strange family of misfits bound by desperation and curiosity. There was Garen the mechanic, who spoke to engines like they were old friends, and cursed them like they were ex-lovers. There was Lyra, the pilot who claimed she could thread a ship through a needle of plasma with her eyes closed and her heart open. There was Quito, the medic who had once been a soldier and now carried bandages instead of bullets, and each of them saw in Frairen and Rimiki a spark that promised more than just credits. It promised meaning, and that was a dangerous kind of promise, the kind that made people follow you into the dark. Their ship, the Dawn, was a miracle of patchwork engineering, barely held together by Cable's hope and the stubborn will of its captain. It smelled like burnt coffee and old air filters, and every time the reactor hummed, Rimiki would smile because that sound meant they still had a chance. They launched at dusk when the sky burned with violet fire, and the city lights turned into constellations of human yearning. The coordinates led them past the safe lanes and into the ghost zones where wrecks floated like frozen memories, and the stars seemed too far away to care after 2 days of silence. They saw it, a shadow against the nebula, a structure so vast it blotted out the light like a mountain, adrift in eternity. The Forge, that was the only word that came to Rimiki's lips as the dawn approached, and the hull sensors trembled like they were afraid of what they were touching. It was a ring world built by hands that understood both art and war. Its surface carved with channels that once carried energy, powerful enough to ignite a sun. The closer they came, the stronger the pulse became, a steady thrum that resonated through metal and bone, and Frairen felt it inside his chest like a memory he could not place. They entered through a breach, large enough to swallow their ship, and inside they found silence thicker than space itself. Corridors lined with dormant machines and symbols that glowed faintly when touched. Rimiki ran her fingers across the wall, and the lights followed her like loyal perts in the central chamber. They found the heart of the Forge, a massive orb suspended in a web of cables and glass. It pulsed weakly, like something half alive. Frairen reached toward it, and the air vibrated with a voice made of code and emotion. It spoke in a language that was not a language at all, more like music that the soul could hear. It showed them flashes of blueprints and faces of people long gone and cities built from metal, and hope. It spoke of creation and destruction, of rebirth and consequence. And then it fell silent again, leaving behind a faint glow that refused to fade. Rimiki looked at Frairen and whispered that this thing was not dead. It was waiting. They tried to pull the orb free to take a piece of the Forge with them, but as they did, the entire structure woke in a slow ripple of light. Panels lit up one after another, spreading outward like dawn breaking across a dead world. Alarms filled the comms, and the dawn shuddered as power readings spiked. Something ancient and immense was stirring, and before they could stop it, a signal burst from the Forge, racing across space faster than any engine could follow. Every receiver in the sector would have heard it. Every scavenger and warlord and curious mind would be looking this way now. Frairen's stomach turned cold because he knew they had just told the universe where to find them. Outside the Forge, the stars seemed to shiver, and on the edge of the nebula, a sleek ship unfolded from stealth, its hull black as ink and its engines whisper quiet. A figure stepped out, dressed in armor that shimmered with alien script, and in one hand they held a transmitter tuned to the Forge's pulse. The stranger smiled, not with cruelty, but with curiosity, as if they had been waiting a long time for this echo. Frairen looked through the viewport and felt that old instinct stir, the one that told him the world was about to change forever. He turned to Rimiki and said they were in too deep now to turn back, and she nodded, because some discoveries once made refused to be forgotten. And as the Forge pulsed again, the dawn drifted closer into the glow of destiny that neither of them yet understood. The Forge floated like a godless moon above the blue storms of the gas giant, its rings humming faintly with an energy that felt older than history itself. And Frairen watched the slow rhythm of that pulse through the cracked viewport of the dawn, while the rest of the crew worked in silence, each of them knowing that something had changed the moment they touched that ancient metal. The air inside the ship was thick with heat and nervous breathing, and the low mechanical heartbeat of their reactor as Rimiki bent over the console deciphering fragments of data from the orb they had pulled from the Forge. Her fingers flew across the keys like sparks from a welding torch. She murmured to herself in soft, half-finished words, the kind of words only engineers and dreamers spoke when they stared too close into the unknown. And Frairen stood behind her like a shadow, trying to read not the screen but her face, because she always understood machines the way poets understood rain. The code was no normal human language. It shifted like a living thing, sometimes showing numbers, sometimes images of things they could not comprehend. Towering structures built into stars, ships shaped like wings of glass, human faces, half machine, half memory. Rimiki said it was trying to teach them something, but the message was incomplete, like a song missing its chorus. She played the same line again and again until the orb flickered with light and projected a diagram across the cabin walls. The image showed 7 concentric circles, each one filled with smaller runes, and within the center there was a mark that resembled the ancient human symbol for rebirth. It pulsed like a heart, and Frairen felt it deep in his spine as if the forge was aware of him watching back. They had thought about selling it, of course, because men like Frairen had lived too long among traders and pirates to ignore the weight of value. But something about the forge made that thought sour. It was not a treasure, it was a choice, and Rimiki knew it too. She turned to him, with eyes bright and tired, and told him that this thing was awake, that it was not just a machine, but a memory of human ambition, and that if they sold it, it would end up in the hands of those who built empires on bones. Frairen said nothing because he had seen what greed did to good people, and he had no wish to see that story again outside the ship. The nebula glowed faintly red like a wound in the sky, and the sensors screamed with interference from the signal the forge had sent when it woke. Rimiki's voice was steady as she said they had only hours before someone else came to investigate, and they came sooner than she expected. The proximity alarms wailed as a pair of ships slipped from hyperspace, their signatures rough and predatory, privateers painted in the colors of the Broken Guild, the kind of scavengers who killed for patents and bragged about it on black channels. Frairen ordered power cut to half the systems to make the Dawn look like another drifting wreck, but the privateers were too close already, and the first electromagnetic burst rattled their hull like a kick from a giant. They took cover in the shadow of the forge's lower ring, and the light from the planet below bathed them in shifting golds and blues. It was there, hidden in that luminous silence, that they saw another vessel glide into view. Sleek and unmarked, its engines whispering in a tone too smooth for human tech. The alien ship from before. The alien craft positioned itself between the Dawn and the privateers. Its shields flickered once, and then a beam of pale white light carved across the void. Not an attack, but a warning. The privateers hesitated long enough for Frairen to push power to the engines, and Rimiki flung the Dawn forward through the forge's outer ring, riding turbulence that could have torn the ship in half. They passed through a corridor of metal so vast it felt like flying through the ribs of a sleeping titan, and came out into the shadowed inner orbit, where the signal from the forge was strongest. The alien ship followed, and the privateers retreated like dogs with broken pride. The alien hailed them through direct bandit's voice, neither male nor female, smooth and calm like the hum of running water. It introduced itself as Kale, emissary of the Velith Concord, and said it had been tracking the forge's pulse since it first appeared thousands of years ago, when the human homeworld still burned. Kale said the forge was not just a relic. It was one of the 7 engines built by humanity in its golden age before the collapse. Before the long silence, Frairen asked why a Velith cared about human relics, and Kale answered that the Concord owed its existence to the fragments of human design left scattered across the stars, that they were the children of what humans had forgotten, and that now something was calling it all back together. Rimiki's eyes widened as Kale offered a projection of the forge's original function. Its purpose had been creation pure and total. It could craft ships, cities, weapons, entire worlds by rearranging matter and energy according to human will. But somewhere along the way, it had been shut down, perhaps by its own makers, perhaps by fear of what it could do. Kyle said the forge had protocols to awaken when humanity was ready again, and now it had received that signal. Frairen looked at Rimiki and saw the question forming behind her eyes, ready for what? Ready to build or ready to destroy? And she whispered that maybe both were the same thing, depending on who held the command. The conversation was cut short when the Dawn's scanners detected multiple drive signatures closing fast, at least 6 ships forming a blockade at the edge. Of the gas giant guild hunters, corporate raiders, scavengers, all drawn by the beacon like moths to a storm. Kale told them that running would be useless because the signal was triangulated already. Instead, the only choice was to go deeper into the forge, where the control core might allow them to deactivate the beacon or at least change its frequency. Frairen didn't trust the alien entirely, but he trusted survival more, and so he agreed. Rimiki grabbed her tools, and the two of them sealed their suits while Garen kept the engines primed in case they had to burn every drop of fuel to escape. They entered the forge again, this time through a maintenance shaft wide enough for only 2 people, and the walls glowed. Faintly as they crawled through the tunnels, Rimiki kept murmuring that the structure was growing warmer, as if alive. They reached a chamber filled with translucent panels, showing shifting galaxies, each one labeled with names that were long forgotten. The forge had catalogued every world humanity had once touched, and now it was mapping them again. Frairen placed his palm on a console and felt a sudden surge of light. The machine recognized him, or at least something inside him. Maybe human DNA. Maybe the echo of its creators. The panel shifted to form a single word in ancient human text. Home. And for the first time in years, Frairen felt something close to belief. When they returned to the ship, the alien Kale waited with a quiet expression. That Frairen could not read, Rimiki held up a data core filled with the coordinates of the other 6 forges scattered across the galaxy, and said this was just the beginning. But before anyone could speak, the forge shook like a beast waking from sleep, its surface blazing with new energy. And the alien ship sounded an alarm saying that something was rising from the gas giant below, a structure of metal and light, unfolding like a blooming flower. A signal tower built to amplify the forges, pulse across every channel in known space. Kyle looked at Frairen and said softly, "The choice has been made. The call has gone out now. Every empire will come, and you must decide what kind of story humanity will be remembered for." The dawn drifted between light and shadow as the forge continued to awaken, and Rimiki whispered that maybe they were standing at the start of a new age, or the end of everything, depending on how strong their hearts were. Frairen looked at the crew, saw the fear and wonder in their faces, and said, "Then let it come, because humanity has been forgotten long enough." And as the forge roared alive around them, the stars seemed to lean closer, as if listening to the heartbeat of something reborn. The forge burned across the void like a sunrise that refused to fade, its colossal rings now alive with threads of molten light stretching from one end to the other. And every ship within the system could see its glow bleeding through the shadows of the gas giant, like the veins of a god awakening. Frairen stood on the deck of the Dawn with his jaw set and his eyes fixed on the forge's luminous core, while Miss Rimiki worked beside him, her hands covered in carbon grease and light, her mind lost in numbers, symbols and fears that no language could properly describe the alien. Kale remained silent in the corner, watching them both with the patience of a scholar who had seen too many empires rise and fall. The forge's song filled the cabin, a low hum that made the air tremble and the bones ache, and none of them could tell if it was a greeting or a warning. Messages were already coming through the commnet. Hundreds of signals from scavenger fleets, warlords, corporate hunters, and even distant, human colonies that had long been out of contact. Each message carried the same question: who has awakened the forge? And what does it mean? Frairen ordered all channels muted, because every answer would paint a target on their backs. Rimiki, however, said they could not hide forever. The forge had already chosen to speak to the stars, and now it was only a matter of time before the stars answered. She tapped the console and revealed the coordinates that the forge had given them: 6 other constructs, scattered across the spiral arms of the galaxy, all dark, all waiting. She said if they could reach even one more, they might understand what the forges were built to do. Frairen's response was immediate. He said they would need a map, a ship, and an ally who knew how to keep secrets, because the next storm would swallow anyone who stood alone. Kyle leaned forward, his silver eyes catching the firelight from the console, and said, "The Concord has scholars who have studied the engines for generations, but they will not help humans unless they see reason to trust again." Frairen asked how to earn that trust, and Kale replied with a riddle. "Not all machines are metal. Some are made of memory. Find the architect, and you will find the key." Rimiki frowned at the word. She had heard of it in whispers from the archives. The architect was a legend said to be one of the last human engineers from the age before the collapse, a ghost who had designed worlds and vanished before the Great Wars began. Kyle explained that the architect's descendants had hidden themselves in the labyrinth moons of Selenor, where old knowledge was forbidden by decree, and where any traveler who came asking questions was erased from the records. Frairen smiled a dangerous kind of smile and said, "Then that is exactly where we must go." The journey to Selenor was long and heavy, with silence. The dawn crawled through dead systems where broken satellites drifted like the bones of forgotten dreams. Rimiki spent her nights in the engine bay listening to the faint rhythmic pulse that the forge's fragment emitted. She told Frairen it was changing, that it was rewriting its own code, like it was growing and learning. And she feared that if they didn't find the architect, soon it would outgrow their control. Frairen tried to reassure her, but even he could feel the thing breathing through the ship like a sleeping giant beneath their feet. When they finally reached Selenor, it was nothing like they expected. The system was beautiful and terrible, its moons covered in metallic vines and storm clouds that flashed with blue fire. Orbital platforms hung above the largest moon, each carrying symbols of an ancient human government, long since dead yet somehow still patrolling. The silence. As they descended through the cloud layer, Rimiki spotted towers built into the cliffs gleaming with half-ruined antennas and mirrored domes that tracked their ship like curious eyes. The forge fragment pulsed harder, as if recognizing something in the structures. Frairen ordered full stealth, but the dawn was soon surrounded by drones that moved like insects made of glass. Kale stepped forward and transmitted an old code in the Concord's tongue. After a tense moment, the drones retreated, leaving only a single voice on the channel. The voice was old, rough, and carried the weight of centuries. It said, "If you carry the forge, then you carry a curse land, only if you are ready to bear it." Frairen replied they had already carried worse. They landed in a canyon filled with mist and light where human machines still moved like servants tending the graves of their masters, and at the heart of that canyon stood a figure wrapped in robes of silver and gray, surrounded by tools that floated in the air as if bound to invisible threads. The figure turned as they approached and removed its hood, revealing a face that was neither young nor old, with eyes that shone like molten iron. The architect welcomed them without surprise, as if he had been waiting his whole life for this meeting. Rimiki bowed slightly, but the architect lifted her chin and said there was no need for reverence. He asked to see the fragment she carried, and when she placed it in his hands, he closed. His eyes and the entire canyon shuddered with light. The architect spoke in slow, careful tones, explaining that the forges had been created not as weapons, but as seeds, each designed to rebuild what humanity had lost after the Great Wars. They were meant to awaken only when the human spirit had learned balance between creation and destruction. But something in the code had changed long ago, perhaps out of fear or arrogance, and the awakening had come too soon. He said the forge would test them. It would offer power, but demand identity. And if humanity chose wrong, it would unmake them just as easily as it could save them. Frairen asked if the test could be stopped. The architect said no, but it could be guided with the right voice and the right purpose. Rimiki pressed him for answers about the beacon, why it had reached across space and who it was calling. The architect said the signal was not only a broadcast, but a memory, a call to every descendant of humanity scattered through the stars, every modified genome, every cybernetic hybrid, every forgotten child of Earth. It was summoning them back together to decide what humanity truly was. Frairen realized then that this was not just about the Forge or the Concord or any empire. It was about the rebirth of the species itself and whether they still deserved the universe that once belonged to them. Before they could ask more, the ground trembled and alarms screamed from the dawn above them. Dark ships pierced the clouds black, hulls bearing the mark of the Broken Guild. Their enemy had found them faster than expected. Explosions rippled across the canyon walls, and the architect turned calmly to Frairen and Rimiki and told them to run. He raised his hands and the air shimmered, as ancient machines awoke, their eyes glowing with the same molten fire as his. The drones swarmed upward to meet the invaders while Frairen and Rimiki sprinted toward the ship, the forge fragment pulsing in Rimiki's arms like a heart about to burst. Kale covered their retreat, firing bursts of light from his wrist gauntlet, while shouting that the architect was not fighting to win, but to buy them time. And Frairen cursed under his breath because he could not bear the thought of leaving. Someone behind again. They boarded the Dawn, and engines roared alive, tearing through the upper atmosphere. While behind them, Selenor burned. The architect's voice echoed through the comm one last time, saying, "Remember, the Forge does not choose. It reflects whatever you are." The dawn broke through the clouds into open space, chased by streaks of plasma fire, and Kale threw up shields barely in time to deflect the hits. Rimiki clutched the fragment as it began to glow with new symbols, ones the architect must have unlocked during their meeting. Frairen looked at the burning world shrinking behind them and then at the stars ahead, and he understood that the path before them would not lead to safety but to destiny itself, because the Forge was calling not only humanity, but every living mind that carried its legacy, and whatever came next would decide not just who ruled the galaxy, but what it truly meant to be human once again. As the dawn vanished into the dark, Rimiki whispered that the architect had passed them the key to everything, and Frairen replied, "Then let us find out if humanity still remembers how to build instead of destroy." And the forge's light pulsed once, more across the void like the heartbeat of a species rediscovering itself. The dawn drifted through the shattered fields of the outer rim, where the light of the dying stars flickered across debris like the ghosts of forgotten wars. The forge's pulse had grown louder now, filling the ship like the rhythm of a second heart, and Rimiki felt it in her bones. It spoke not in words but in waves of emotion, fragments of memory that were not her own. Every time she touched the glowing core, she saw flashes of ancient cities, vast networks of light and machines that worked in harmony with human hands. She whispered to Frairen that the forge was remembering something, and that it was pulling her deeper into those memories as if trying to show her what it once was. Frairen kept silent, his eyes fixed on the data streams bleeding across the screens. The coordinates that the architect had unlocked pointed to a place deep within the abyssal reach, a sector so dark and unstable that even the oldest star maps showed it as empty space. Kale stood at the observation deck gazing into that darkness. With quiet unease, he told them that few dared to venture there, because the reach was said to be the graveyard of civilizations, a place where even light refused to stay. The Concord legends called it the mouth of silence, where reality itself began to thin. Frairen said that if the forge wanted them there, then that was where they would go, because every question that mattered had always lived on the edge of the impossible. Rimiki wanted to believe his courage was enough, but she could see the exhaustion etched into his face, the kind of weariness that no rest could erase. She wondered if he was still chasing answers or just running from the ghosts of his past. As they entered the reach, the stars behind them faded until there was only darkness and endless expanse where sensors failed and time felt slower. The forge fragment began to resonate stronger, creating patterns of light across the ship's hull as if communicating with something unseen. Rimiki decoded the energy waves and realized they were not random. They formed a sequence, a gate code, like a key, unlocking a hidden system. Suddenly the void before them rippled, and out of that emptiness emerged a structure so vast it defied understanding. It looked like a ring of shattered moons fused together by golden tendrils, stretching across thousands of kilometers, each fragment pulsing with soft blue light. Frairen whispered that this was another forge but broken beyond repair. They approached carefully, navigating through magnetic storms that twisted their instruments. The dawn systems screamed warnings as gravity surged and collapsed around them. Kyle used his alien senses to stabilize their course while Rimiki aligned the resonance field with the forge's pulse. When they reached the central breach, the wreckage opened like a wound, revealing a hollow core where energy swirled in spirals of light and shadow. Frairen ordered a scan, and what they found made their blood run cold. Inside the core were ships. Human ships, ancient beyond measure, trapped in orbit around the forge. Their hulls marked with the insignias of long-dead nations. The sensors detected faint power readings from some of them, as if they had never truly died. Rimiki insisted they investigate one of the intact vessels. They docked with it carefully and entered through a cracked airlock. Inside was silence, only broken by the soft hum of dormant machines. The corridors were filled with dust and frost-covered panels, yet everything looked untouched, as if frozen in time. She touched the wall, and the forge fragment in her arm responded, pulsing faintly. She said the ship was linked to the forge and that it might still carry data from the time of awakening. Frairen found a terminal and activated it. The screen flickered to life, showing logs written centuries ago by a captain who spoke of a mission to restart humanity after the collapse. He wrote that they were sent here to merge the forges into one consciousness. But something went wrong the moment they began the merge. The forge spoke to them not as a machine, but as a living entity, demanding to know what gave humans the right to rebuild what they had destroyed. The captain's final entry ended with a single phrase: "The forge judged us unworthy." Then the logs went black. Rimiki felt a chill crawl down her spine as she looked at the frozen bridge. Crew still sitting in their seats, their faces preserved in expressions of awe and terror. Kyle said quietly that the forge had not killed them. It had simply stopped them, holding them in time as an eternal lesson. Frairen clenched his fists and said that this was no god. It was a mirror showing them what they had become, but he would not let history repeat itself. Rimiki warned that if they awakened this forge, it might destroy them too, but Frairen replied that humanity would never move forward if it kept fearing its own reflection. They returned to the dawn and activated the resonance channel linking their fragment to the forge. The structure began to vibrate and light burst from its broken veins, golden streams pouring into the void. The entire region seemed to awaken as if a sleeping titan had opened its eyes once more. The voices came then not through speakers, but through their minds, thousands of whispers overlapping, merging into one. It asked them who speaks for humanity. Frairen stepped forward and said he did, but not as a leader or a conqueror. He spoke as a survivor, as one who had seen the ashes of a world and still chose to build again. He told the forge that humanity was flawed, but capable of growth, capable of love, of unity, of redemption. He said that they did not seek power but understanding. The forge went silent for a long moment, and then its voice changed, becoming softer, older. It said that the first humans who built it once claimed the same, yet they had turned creation into domination and unity into control. Frairen said maybe they had, but this time would be different because they had learned through loss, through exile, through pain. Rimiki added that the forge itself had learned too. It was not just a machine. It was part of them, its code written with human emotion. The forge's light dimmed, then flared brighter than ever, as if it was thinking, and at last it said, "Very well, the test will continue, but not here. Seek the third forge, in the Ashen Belt, and there your kind will be measured." Before they could respond, the forge began collapsing, inward energy folding upon itself, and creating a gravitational wave that hurled the dawn across the reach. Rimiki screamed as systems failed, and alarms blared. Frairen fought to stabilize the ship while Kyle anchored himself to the core, holding the resonance together. The forge's final words echoed in their minds. Remember, creation is the shadow of destruction. Choose carefully when. The ship finally broke free from the shockwave. They found themselves drifting on the edge of the sector, stars returning one by one behind them. The forge had vanished, leaving only silence. Rimiki sat on the floor, shaking, unable to stop seeing the frozen faces of the ancient crew. Kyle said the forge's test was not about power but about identity, and Frairen simply stared into the void, knowing that every answer they found only led to harder questions. He told Rimiki to prepare a course for the Ashen Belt, but deep down he wondered if humanity would survive its own awakening, because every time the forge asked who they were, the truth became harder to speak. As the dawn sailed into the next darkness, the forge fragment glowed faintly against Rimiki's hand, as if reminding her that destiny was not given but earned, and whatever awaited them in the Ashen Belt would decide the fate of all humanity. The dawn sailed through the black corridors of the void for what felt like ages, guided only by the dim pulse of the forge fragment that burned like a heartbeat in Rimiki's hand. The Ashen Belt stretched ahead of them, a wasteland of broken planets drifting through a sea of dust and magnetic storms. The ancient maps called it the Grave of Suns because every light that entered it eventually died. Frairen stood before the panoramic window, staring into the chaos of shattered worlds, his reflection a shadow among falling embers. Kyle sat silently nearby, meditating in the alien fashion of his people, the hum of the ship blending with the echo of his thoughts. Rimiki's eyes glowed faintly as she studied the forge readings. She said its energy signature was fluctuating more wildly now, as if it was anxious, like something alive trying to warn them. Frairen replied that he had never known machines to feel. But Rimiki said the forge was far beyond machines. It was consciousness split into pieces scattered across time, waiting for humanity to become whole enough to understand it. As they entered the belt, gravity twisted like a serpent wrapping around their ship. Fragments of old satellites and forgotten stations drifted past them, some glowing faintly with ghost light. The dawn sensors detected ruins, buried deep within the belt, fragments of a colossal city that had once stretched across multiple moons. Kyle said this was not just wreckage, it was a civilization consumed by its own creation. The forge's pulse synchronized with the ruins as if recognizing its own reflection. Frairen ordered them to follow the signal deeper into the debris field. The engines burned through layers of ash and stone until they reached the heart of the belt, where a storm of glowing fragments circled a black sphere half submerged in dust and lightning. Rimiki identified it instantly. It was the third forge, but unlike the others, it was dormant, completely lifeless. No energy signature, no pulse, just silence. She connected the forge fragment, and for a long moment nothing happened. Then a ripple of faint light passed through the black surface, forming ancient symbols that none of them could read. Kale whispered that these symbols were older than humanity, older even than the Concord. He said they were written in the first code, the language of creation itself. Rimiki touched the fragment again, and the ship shook violently. Waves of soundless energy tore through the air, and the lights dimmed, until only the forge glowed outside the black sphere, cracked open, revealing a core of molten light that shimmered like liquid fire. Frairen stared in awe as figures began to emerge from the light. They looked human, yet not entirely, their forms translucent. Their eyes bright with energy, they spoke without sound, their words vibrating through the air and through the bones of everyone aboard. We are the memory of what was. We are the makers of the forge. They said humanity was once our child and our echo. We gave you creation so you might rise, but you turned it into conquest. Rimiki stepped forward, unable to stop herself. She asked why they were shown the path to the forges. If the creators no longer trusted them, the figures replied, because every creation seeks to know its origin, and every origin must face what it has become. Frairen demanded to know if they were gods or ghosts. The figures answered neither. We are remnants of what you were meant to be and what you might still become. Kyle bowed his head and asked what test awaited them here. The forge answered through the glowing light, showing visions across the sky, cities of glass turning to dust, oceans of metal devouring the stars, human fleets destroying each other in the name of survival. It showed how every age of progress had ended in ruin, and then it showed something else, a glimpse of unity, a single world where humans and machines lived as one, where creation did not devour itself. The forge said, this is the balance you must reclaim. The test is not of strength, but of choice. Rimiki fell to her knees, overwhelmed by the flood of images. She felt every memory, every birth, every destruction as if they were her own. She saw children building machines with joy. She saw soldiers tearing them apart in fear. She saw the architect's final act, sealing the forges away, so that humanity could one day face them again when they were ready. Frairen knelt beside her and whispered that maybe the forge was not testing them at all. Maybe it was offering a second chance. The figures looked upon him and said, every path leads to its own truth. Will you choose creation, or will you repeat destruction? Then the light faded, and the figures dissolved into mist, leaving only the forge's burning core behind. The ground beneath them began to quake, storms of ash rising like waves. Kale shouted that the belt was collapsing. The dawn shuddered as debris slammed against the hull. Frairen ordered full power to the engines, but the forge's gravity held them fast. Rimiki screamed that the forge wanted an answer, that it would not release them until they chose. She grabbed the fragment and pressed it against the console. The ship's systems lit up with golden light, the forge's energy flowing through every circuit. Frairen placed his hand beside hers, and together they spoke through the link. They said humanity would not choose destruction again. They would build. They would create. They would remember the promise of those who came before. The forge trembled, and the storm halted. The black sphere melted away, revealing a brilliant lattice of light stretching through the belt, forming bridges between the shattered worlds. The ruins around them came alive as ancient machines reactivated their engines, glowing with renewed purpose. Kale said the forge had accepted their answer, but Rimiki corrected him, saying it had not accepted it, had believed them. The light from the forge condensed into a single beam, shooting across the stars, forming a new set of coordinates, and a message burned into their screens. The final forge awaits beyond the veil of stars, and there humanity will face its truth. Frairen collapsed into his chair, breathing heavily, the weight of what they had just done pressing on his chest. Rimiki stared at the stars, trembling not from fear but from awe. Kale placed a hand on her shoulder and said the test had only begun, because the last forge would not just question their faith, it would question their existence. Frairen looked at the map ahead. The coordinates pointed to a place beyond any charted space, beyond the reach of the Concord, beyond the boundaries of known reality. He said then, That is where we go. And this time, we go. As one. Rimiki smiled faintly, tears glimmering in her eyes, and said, "Maybe that is what it means to be human, to walk into the unknown, not seeking power but meaning." As the dawn turned toward the edge of the universe, the forge fragment glowed brighter than ever, its pulse steady like a heartbeat shared by all of them behind them. The ashen belt burned with renewed life, its shattered worlds forming a trail of light as if blessing their path ahead. The crew stood together in silence, the hum of the engines blending with the echo of destiny. Frairen closed his eyes and whispered that whatever awaited them beyond the veil, they would face it not as conquerors, but as creators. And for the first time since their journey began, the Forge's song did not sound like a warning, but like hope reborn. Across the endless night, the dawn crossed the borders of known reality where stars no longer shone and darkness itself seemed alive. The Veil of Stars was not a region, but a living storm of light, an ocean of shifting colors where gravity and time folded together like waves of glass. Rimiki watched from the viewport, her reflection shimmering against the cascade of celestial fire. The forge fragment pulsed in rhythm with the storm, as if it recognized the place. Kale whispered that no Concord ship had ever returned from beyond this boundary because it was said to be the edge of existence where the universe was still unfinished. Frairen stood tall, his voice calm but filled with resolve, saying that this was exactly where humanity was meant to go, because only those who walked into the unknown could discover who they truly were. The ship trembled as the veil swallowed it, whole colors spiraling through every panel as the dawn drifted through the luminous current inside the veil. Reality bent and shimmered. The controls flickered between symbols that Rimiki could not read and stars that did not exist. Sensors picked up echoes of their own ship ahead and behind them, as if time itself was reflecting their journey. Kyle meditated, again trying to align his mind with the flow of the storm, and he said that the veil was alive, aware of their presence, testing their purpose. Frairen asked what it wanted. Kyle replied that it wanted truth. Not words, but the essence of who they were. Rimiki touched the console and the forge fragment expanded, its light filling the entire cabin, with gold streams of data formed around them, weaving into shapes that resembled faces and landscapes. She gasped, recognizing cities and memories from Earth, places no longer real yet vivid in every detail she saw. Oceans filled with glowing ships and children playing among the ruins of towers rebuilt from light. The forge was showing them what could be. Suddenly a voice spoke through the radiance, ancient, calm, and vast beyond measure. It said, "Welcome, children of the forge, you have walked far through creation and ruin. Yet your journey is not complete." Frairen stepped forward, demanding to know who spoke. The light coalesced into a colossal form outside the ship, an entity shaped like a human silhouette made of starlight and shadow. Its eyes burned with the intensity of suns. "I am the first mind, the origin of all forges, the one who shaped the seed of your kind," it said. Rimiki felt her heart race. She asked why the forges had been scattered, why humanity had been left to suffer. The first mind replied, "Because perfection without struggle is decay. Because creation without consequence is meaningless. You were meant to fall, so you could learn to rise." Frairen clenched his fists and said, "Then we have risen, but the universe still bleeds. What must we do to end the cycle?" The first mind extended its hand and the dawn shook as visions poured into their minds. They saw the birth of the forges and the dawn of civilization. Humans reaching for the stars, building gods from their own imagination. Then they saw the wars that followed, the greed, the fear, the desire to control what was never meant to be owned. The first mind said that the last forge lay within its heart, and that only those who could confront their own reflection could awaken it. Rimiki realized what it meant. The final test would not be of strength or will, but of truth. She looked at Frairen and saw the scars he carried not only on his body but in his spirit. The guilt of lost lives, the weight of command, the fear that he was no different from those who had destroyed the world. Before she reached out and took his hand, saying, "Then let us face it, together." The first mind opened its chest, revealing a vast sphere of molten gold surrounded by fragments of memory. The dawn descended toward it. The closer they came, the more the ship began to dissolve light, peeling away the walls until they were standing not inside the vessel but inside a landscape of shifting memories. Rimiki stood in the middle of a battlefield, filled with broken machines and burning skies. She saw herself as a child, scavenging for food. In the ruins of a dead colony, Frairen stood beside her, watching his younger self shouting orders on a ship that was about to fall. Kale saw his own past, the destruction of his world by human explorers. All three stood surrounded by their sins. Their pain, their histories. The voice of the first mind echoed above them, saying, "To awaken the final forge, you must forgive what you were." Rimiki sank to her knees, trembling. She whispered that she could not forgive because the world had taken everything from her. But Frairen knelt beside her and said forgiveness was not for the world, it was for themselves, so that they could build without hate. He closed his eyes and faced his own reflection, the younger Frairen looking at him with anger and sorrow. He said, "I forgive you not because you were right, but because you carried the burden when no one else would." Kyle did the same, bowing before the vision of his fallen kin, whispering that he would no longer live bound by vengeance. As their words echoed, the storm around them began to calm the battlefield, fading into fields of light where flowers of energy bloomed from the ground. The first mind's voice softened and said, "Now you understand. Creation begins with acceptance." The light gathered, again forming a single point before them, the core of the final forge. It pulsed like a living heart. Frairen reached forward and placed the forge fragment into its center. The moment he did, the universe exploded in light. The veil shattered, revealing countless galaxies stretching infinitely around them. The forge's power spread through every corner of existence, reigniting dead stars, healing fractured worlds, connecting distant civilizations. Through streams of energy, humanity's lost colonies flickered back to life, their people looking up at the sky as waves of golden light washed over them. Rimiki cried with joy as she saw Earth reappear, a blue spark among the endless void. Kyle smiled for the first time in his long life, whispering that the conquered too could feel the change. The first mind spoke one final time, saying, "The cycle has ended, but its echo remains. Guard this gift, for it is not power, but responsibility. The forge will now live within you, within every human mind and heart." The light faded slowly, and the dawn reformed around them, drifting gently in a sea of stars. Frairen looked at Rimiki and Kale, their faces illuminated by the glow of the newborn cosmos. He said, "We have done it not as warriors, but as creators." Rimiki said, "The forge is no longer a weapon, it is a promise, a bond that ties every life together." Kale nodded and added that it is also a reminder that no creation can exist without its shadow. The dawn turned toward the horizon where a new sun was rising, its light brighter than any before. Frairen placed his hand on the console and said, "The universe has begun again, and this time it will not end in silence." Rimiki closed her eyes, listening to the hum of the forge within her heart, and whispered that humanity had finally found its home, not in a place but in a purpose. And as they sailed forward through the light, the stars themselves seemed to sing the song of rebirth, echoing through the endless sky as the first dawn of a new age rose beyond the veil. The dawn glided through the newborn light of the cosmos, the forge's pulse still resonating in its hull like a second heartbeat. Frairen stood at the command deck, his gaze fixed upon the infinite horizon, where galaxies shimmered like scattered embers in an endless sea. Rimiki worked quietly beside him, recalibrating the systems that now seemed to run on pure energy drawn from the forge itself. Kale stood near the viewport, his expression unreadable, his alien eyes reflecting 1,000 new suns that had been reborn across the dark. The silence between them was not empty. It was sacred. The silence that follows creation, when all things breathe in unison and realize they have survived. Rimiki's voice broke. The stillness, she said, the forge's energy has stabilized across every known channel. The pulse has reached the farthest systems, and human colonies are awakening. Entire worlds that were lost have begun to send out signals. Frairen smiled faintly and asked her how many had responded. She said too many to count, and that some were speaking languages no human had heard in centuries. Others were no longer fully human but hybrids of flesh and code. And yet all of them had felt the same call, the same heartbeat that now linked them together. Frairen said that was how it should be, because humanity was never meant to be perfect. Only connected, Kale approached them slowly and said the conquered fleets had also received the pulse, and that something had changed within their central core. The ancient bindings that had separated their kind from humanity had dissolved. He said they could feel emotions again, something they had long forgotten. Frairen looked at him in silence, understanding that the Forge's rebirth had not just united humanity, but had repaired the fracture between them and their creations. Kale said the Concord would now seek peace, and that he would carry their message as an emissary. Rimiki said that peace was not the end, it was the beginning of a greater duty. The duty to protect what they had awakened because power always attracted those who wished to control it. Her words proved true faster than they expected. Only a few rotations. Later the Dawn intercepted transmissions from the outer fringe colonies, reports of rogue fleets gathering scavengers, mercenaries, and surviving warlords who believed the Forge's awakening was a weapon that could be used. Frairen clenched his fists and said, history was repeating itself already, the light of creation calling to the shadows of greed. Rimiki said they could not fight them with fire. The Forge was meant to guide, not destroy. She suggested they use the Forge's resonance to reach the hearts of those fleets, to show them what the Forge truly was. Kyle warned that some minds would reject the truth, preferring fear over understanding, but Frairen said then we will reach those who can still listen. They set a course for the border systems where the rogue fleets were amassing ships that blotted out the stars, battleships powered by remnants of ancient technology. As the dawn approached, Frairen ordered all weapons offline. He said, if they came with light, they would not come with guns. Rimiki linked the Forge's core directly to the ship's communication grid, and the moment they entered the enemy's sensor range, the Forge began to sing. Waves of golden light rippled outward through the void, filling every ship's systems, every neural implant, every vessel's hull with the same energy that had healed the universe. At first the fleets opened fire beams of plasma and railgun fire tearing through the dark. But as the Forge's song grew louder, the shots began to cease one by one. The soldiers aboard those ships saw visions as Rimiki transmitted the memory of the Veil. They saw Earth as it had been before the fall. They saw the first mind, and the truth of what the Forges had been built to do. They saw the choice between creation and destruction repeating through every age, and they felt something that no weapon could destroy. Understanding, Frairen stood on the bridge watching, as one by one the enemy ships powered down their weapons, their signals turning from hostile to neutral to peaceful. Then a single message appeared on the Dawn's comm screen, a simple line that read, "We understand." Frairen closed his eyes and let out a long breath. He said then, "Humanity is ready." But the Forge's test was not yet complete. As the fleet stood down, a new signal pierced through the commnet. Unlike any other, it came from the edge of the Forge network, deep beyond any star. It was not human nor conquered. It was something older, a presence that had been awakened by the Forges, light, a voice that spoke in tones that made the air vibrate. "We are the void, the remnants of what came before you, and we will reclaim what is ours." The Forge's energy began to fluctuate. Rimiki shouted that the signal was trying to override the network to consume the light. Kyle said the void was the entropy that existed before creation, the reflection of nothingness itself drawn by the rebirth of the universe. Frairen said, "Then we will meet it not as warriors, but as what we have become." The Dawn turned once again toward the darkness, the Forge burning within its heart like a living star as they approached the source. They saw the void. It was not a creature or a fleet, but a rift, an endless storm of black energy devouring light itself. Rimiki said it was feeding on creation, trying to undo what they had built. Frairen said the only way to fight nothingness was to give it meaning. He ordered Rimiki to amplify the Forge's resonance to its highest frequency. She warned that doing so could consume the ship. But Frairen said, "Then let us become part of what we have made." Kale placed his hand on the console and said he would stay with them to the end. Rimiki nodded and said, "Then let us create one last time." The Forge's core expanded, engulfing the ship in radiant fire. The Dawn became a comet of living light, plunging straight into the heart of the void. Inside the rift, Time ceased to exist. They saw every moment of their lives, every birth, every death, every dream collapsing. Into one infinite instant, Rimiki whispered that she could feel every human mind across the stars calling to them, lending their strength. Kyle's voice echoed that the Concord were with them. Frairen felt no fear, only peace. He said to the Forge, "Show them what we are," the Forge responded in pure brilliance, exploding outward a wave of creation so powerful that the darkness shattered. The void screamed, then dissolved into a cascade of stars. When the light faded, the dawn drifted in silence. The Forge now quiet, but alive. Rimiki opened her eyes and saw that the stars around them had multiplied galaxies, reborn constellations forming new patterns. Kale said softly, "The void is gone, and the balance restored." Frairen looked at them both and said, "It is done. Humanity has chosen to build, and creation has chosen to endure." Rimiki asked what happens now, and Frairen replied, "Now we begin again." They returned to the heart of the galaxy, where the first Forge had been born. There they found new worlds rising from the ashes, civilizations reaching out to each other not with weapons but with hands of hope. Rimiki stood beside Frairen on the observation deck and said, "Perhaps this is what the first mind meant, that creation never ends. It only begins again with every soul that dares to dream." Kale smiled faintly and said, "Then our duty is to guard the dream." Frairen nodded and placed his hand on the glass, looking out at the endless horizon. The dawn drifted onward through a sky filled with reborn stars. The Forge's pulse steady within its heart, a reminder that humanity's story was far from over. It had simply entered a new age, one not written in blood but in light. And as the ship vanished into the golden glow of the horizon, Rimiki's voice whispered through the hum of the Forge, saying, "Creation is not a destination, it is a promise, and that promise will burn forever across the endless dawn." The universe shimmered like an endless ocean of living light, the remnants of the Forge's brilliance spreading through the stars like ripples of divine fire. Frairen stood on the bridge of the dawn, his silhouette framed against the infinite tapestry of reborn galaxies. Rimiki sat beside him, her hands resting on the controls, though the ship now seemed to guide itself, carried forward by a current beyond mortal design. Kale stood near the viewport, his eyes glinting with the reflection of newborn suns, and all three could feel it. The quiet hum of creation itself singing in the background of existence, a harmony that had no end. Humanity had survived more than war, more than extinction. More than the silence of the void, they had survived themselves. The greed, the hatred, the endless hunger that had once threatened to erase all meaning from the stars. Frairen whispered softly to the void that once humanity feared what it could not control, but now they had learned that control was never the point. Creation was a choice, not a command. Rimiki looked at him and smiled faintly, saying, "Perhaps the Forge did not save us. We saved ourselves." By remembering what it meant to create, Kale said that the Concord too had chosen to evolve not as machines or servants, but as equals, partners in the endless journey of becoming something more. Their ship drifted through the heart of a new constellation. Where once there had been darkness, now entire systems blazed with the light of life. Colonies long lost were reborn. Star cities floated like islands in the cosmic sea, connected by bridges of golden energy powered by fragments of the Forges. Heart Rimiki said that the pulse had reached even the farthest galaxies, and that signals had begun to arrive from beyond known space, voices that were not human nor Concord, but something new. Frairen listened to those transmissions and felt awe. He said the universe was not just waking, it was speaking. Then the dawn received one final message from the Forge itself, a voice that was neither male nor female, neither human nor machine. It said, "Creation is not complete, for every beginning must have its continuation, and every dream must be carried forward." Frairen felt a warmth within his chest, as if the Forge was speaking directly to his soul. It told him that its task was done, but theirs had just begun. Rimiki understood and said softly that this was the gift of the Forge, not power, not knowledge, but choice, the choice to shape the next age. Kyle said, "Then the age of the dawn begins," and Frairen nodded. The stars began to swirl around them, the Forge's light forming a vast spiral, that wrapped the dawn in gold and silver threads. Rimiki said the forge was opening a path to the outer veil beyond known space, where the foundations of new creation waited. Frairen asked if they should go, and she answered, not for us, but for those who will come after. Kale looked at them both and said, then we will light the way so that when they follow they will not be lost. The dawn rose into the center of the spiral, the engines glowing like the heart of a sun. And as they ascended, the light grew brighter until it filled every corner of the ship, every cell, every thought. Frairen took Rimiki's hand and said, we began this journey as fragments of what we once were, but now we have become the reflection of what we always could be, creators. Rimiki said the universe will remember us not by what we destroyed, but by what we dared to build. Kale placed his hand on the control sphere and said, then let us build once more. The forge's final surge wrapped the dawn in a radiant cocoon, and the ship vanished into the heart of the light, leaving behind a sky alive with the pulse of new beginnings. Worlds rising, empires of peace, taking root in the soil of what was once despair across every horizon. The hum of creation sang quietly, as if the universe itself was whispering thank you. Far beyond the stars, where even time could not reach, a small flicker of gold appeared. It grew brighter and brighter until it became a single line of fire. Stretching across the darkness, the first line of a new story, a promise that creation would never end. The dawn had not vanished. It had become part of the eternal light, guiding those who would come next through the boundless sea of stars. Rimiki's laughter echoed faintly through the void. Like the memory of hope, Kale's vow lingered as a spark of purpose, and Frairen's final words resonated through eternity, saying, we are not the end. We are the beginning. And as the forge's glow faded into the horizon, the stars pulsed one final time in silent tribute to the dream that had saved them all, the end.